When we talk about great empires, names like Rome, Persia, and China dominate the conversation. But tucked away in the dense forests of West Africa, there once thrived a kingdom so advanced, so artistically gifted, and so politically organized that even European explorers were stunned by what they saw. And then, almost overnight, it was wiped off the map. This is the story of the Benin Empire, not modern-day Benin, but a lost African kingdom of breathtaking sophistication and tragedy that few people outside of Africa are ever taught about. Let's rewind the clock to around the 11th century, in what is today southern Nigeria. In this lush region of rainforests and rivers, a powerful city-state begins to take shape. Originally called Igodomigodo, it was ruled by kings known as Ogisos, or kings of the sky. But in the 13th century, a new dynasty rises, the Obas of Benin, and this marks the true beginning of the Benin Empire. The city of Benin, later called Benin City, becomes its beating heart. Built not with European-style castles, but with ingenious earthen architecture and vast moats that rival anything found in medieval Europe. The walls of Benin were once described as the largest earthworks carried out prior to the mechanical era. No, seriously, they were 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China. Benin wasn't just big, it was beautiful. The empire is most famous for its Benin bronzes, intricately detailed metal plaques, sculptures, and reliefs that captured royal life, battles, spiritual rituals, and court ceremonies. These were not primitive works. These were high art, cast with incredible skill using the lost wax method, a technique also used by the ancient Greeks. The bronzes were made to decorate the royal palace. Some were created to honor ancestors. Others were records of diplomatic relations or epic battles. And here's the kicker. They were centuries old before the Portuguese or British ever set foot in West Africa. Benin had a bureaucracy, a standing army, and a complex tax system. The king, or Oba, ruled as both a spiritual and political leader. But he wasn't a tyrant. He governed through a council of chiefs and religious leaders. Europeans who arrived in the 15th and 16th centuries were stunned. The streets were laid out in a grid, the city was clean and well-planned, and the people were highly organized. This was no tribal village. It was a civilized metropolis. In 1485, Portuguese explorers make contact with Benin. What they found shocked them. A city with public lighting, wide roads, organized markets, and royal guards. They began trading almost immediately. At first, it was a partnership. Benin exported ivory, pepper, palm oil, and art, and in return received guns, cloth, and metal tools. The Portuguese even sent Christian missionaries to the court of the Oba, and for a while, it looked like Benin might become a major global player. But as always, things got complicated. As European powers became more aggressive and more focused on slavery, some rulers within Benin began to participate in the transatlantic slave trade, reluctantly at first, but eventually as a means to maintain power and fend off rivals. It was a brutal exchange, people for weapons, and it would leave a stain on the empire's legacy and its stability. By the 18th century, the glory days of Benin were fading. Internal power struggles, succession crises, and increased pressure from European traders weakened the Oba's control. As the slave trade reached its peak, the human cost was enormous, not just in terms of lives lost, but the social fabric of the empire. Then came the Industrial Revolution in Europe, and with it, a whole new kind of colonial ambition. Africa wasn't just a place to trade anymore, it was a place to conquer, and Benin was in the way. In 1897, everything came crashing down. A British delegation entered Benin territory without permission, against warnings from the Oba and his chiefs. The group was ambushed and several were killed. It became the excuse Britain was waiting for. What followed was the Benin Punitive Expedition, one of the most brutal acts of colonial aggression in African history. A British force of over 1,200 men, armed with machine guns, cannons, and dynamite, stormed Benin City. They burned the city to the ground. They looted thousands of Benin bronzes, which were packed onto ships and sent to museums and private collections across Europe. The Oba was captured and exiled to Calabar, where he died years later in isolation. Benin was officially annexed into the British Empire, its independence gone forever. The burning of Benin wasn't just a military conquest. It was the erasure of an entire civilization's identity. Its art was scattered. Its history was rewritten by the colonizers. And for over a century, the story of Benin was told by the people who destroyed it. But Benin didn't disappear completely. Its traditions lived on in oral histories, in family lineages, and in the surviving Oba dynasty. In 1914, the British reinstated the Obaship, not as rulers, but as ceremonial monarchs. Today, the Oba still holds cultural influence in Nigeria. And in recent years, something extraordinary is happening. The stolen bronzes are finally coming home. Germany, the UK, and other nations are beginning to return looted artifacts to Nigeria. These aren't just museum pieces, they're symbols of a civilization that refused to be forgotten. The story of Benin forces us to rethink what we know about African history. This wasn't a continent of isolated tribes. This was a continent of empires, cities, culture, and power. The Benin Empire stood for nearly 700 years, longer than the British Empire. Its art continues to influence global aesthetics. Its political structure was advanced. Its interactions with Europe were diplomatic, intelligent, and strategic, until they were met with force. Benin is a reminder that Africa's history is not one of silence, it's one of voices that were silenced. But those voices are returning. The ruins of Benin still speak, the bronzes still shine, and the legacy of its people is stronger than ever. So the next time someone tells you that Africa had no history before colonization, tell them about Benin, about the city with the longest walls in the world, about the kingdom that created bronze masterpieces while Europe was still in the Dark Ages, about the empire that stood toe-to-toe with the greatest powers of its time until it was betrayed and burned. Because history isn't just about remembering what happened, it's about correcting what was forgotten.